More than 20 years after I hurtled down the birth canal like a rogue luge, my mother tossed a glass of ice water in my face at the dining room table. She did it when I challenged her about some declaration she'd made. I sputtered in surprise, and she laughed, equally surprised. But rather than taking it like a good sport, I ran off into the pines, cold water and warm tears mixing on my face. My mother gave chase and tackled me on a carpet of needles. "Mom, why do you hate me?" I wailed. "What did I ever do?" Even as a grown woman, I still keenly felt that I wasn't quite her cup of tea. It was at this moment that my mother quit claiming ether-induced amnesia and let me in on the unbecoming story of my particular entry to the land of breathers. Tall, dark, handsome Dr. Danforth caught my slick head in his clean and capable hands when I careened out of the little red tunnel in a torrent. The composition of that great gush mortified my mother in a way that shaped us. I was her third in 4 years. "Oh, Becky, too many babies, so overwhelming. I wasn't ready for another," she lamented, rolling her head from side to side on the slippery needles as we lay together on the ground. "And then, to top it off, you came so fast," she said. "There was simply no time to prepare the field." Well, in the 1950s, that meant shave the pubic area, administer an enema, drape the offending area in sterile sheets, knock the mother out. But so swift was my coming, none of these things happened. Instead, my mother was wide awake for the hurried entry of the doctor, his cotton coat blazing white, his name stitched in looping cursive over his breast pocket. Dr. Danforth was not only handsome and socially prominent, he was revered for having written A Woman's Health. Its sturdy blue spine stood on our family bookshelf, its title in the same black cursive as the script on his lab coat. He was a god in our house by the time I came along. And when I did come along, there was no time for helpful doses of medicine to ease my mother into relaxation. Flat on her back, knees akimbo, she was alert to the deep shame of her unshorn self. Which was thought to be unsanitary, not to mention unladylike. "No time to get you ready, dear," the nurses hailed from under their starched and sharply peaked caps. "Baby is coming." Meanwhile, I was being squeezed into a compressed ball by the utter embrace of my mother's deepest ocean, buffeted by an enormous pulse. For my mother, the birth surge roared, and the pain was huge. No time for ether, or whatever cocktail of anesthetics was used in 1955 to induce the twilight sleep made popular by Queen Victoria. My mother got to feel it, all of it. No time for an enema. Her bowels were full, and she knew it. Even as the pressure of my collapsing skull plates bore down, she resisted. She held me in against those labor waves and the pushing urge. No way was she going to defecate in front of this team of impeccable professionals. While my mother labored to thwart labor, the nurses, only their eyes visible above their masks, managed to mostly conceal her nether region in masses of snowy drapes, the only bulwark they could erect against the rising tide. You know how this story ends. Dr. Danforth found his gloved and manicured hands bathed in my mother's unruly and inevitable excrement. My own gleaming ruby-colored head was baptized in a foul sheen, and the drapes lost their satiny blanch. You were born in a pile of shit. My mother concluded, and it's the only time I ever heard her say that word. Ah, she said, remembering, you were a pretty baby, but you were never an easy one. You were always into something, and I was always so tired. We relaxed side by side on the ground then, our heads touching, looking up at the sky through a tangle of boughs. I had a starring role in this cascade of filth and mortification, and I felt its bite for decades. My mother loved me, sure, but I also knew there was a backstory. Well, who among us in the land before time of recording everything gets to actually know our true birth story? I get to know this version of mine because my birth partner, my mother, didn't have time to receive the usual sedation, the memory-erasing dram. And because she could remember, she could bear me and bear witness. This story is one of forgiveness, because one day my mother tackled me in the woods and had the courage and generosity to share the details of my landing, and it explains a lot. Finally, she was able to admit, and I was able to understand. Thank you very much.